Tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi mahana ki a koutou, kua tae mai ke tēnei hui o Transparency International New Zealand. Haere nā e mātanga o te moana nui a kiwa. Talofa lava, malolele, Lisa Bula, kia orana, hello geta, aloha, g'day, kaya, wanya, and diagwich. And of course, kia ora. Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou. I'm Julie Haggie, Executive Director of Transparency International New Zealand. Greetings to you. We're honoured by your attendance at our webinar today. Greetings to experts from across the Great Pacific Ocean. In Whanganui Atara, Aotearoa, ki te puhupu I te hau, e tino hau e kone. The wind has been strong and at times violent here over the last couple of days, so it's just starting to settle. I'm going to open with an extract from a poem by Carlo Miller, which is about making your own path. Haramai te toki. New shapes and form, a continuous essence. We use your words to shelter, shield, and centre us as we carve our piece of the path that circles us back into our future. It's my honour to greet you today to the last of our webinars for now that have encouraged information sharing and courageous discussion with Pacific people, including in Aotearoa. Our aim in these webinars has been to improve understanding and transparency around some gnarly issues. This series is about helping change that. It's about learning from those who've gone before, lifting up each other's voices and finding the courage to step into talanoa spaces from the village council to parliament. I encourage you to visit our YouTube site, which we will post a link to in the chat. Over our full 3 series, speakers have shared insights and examples of practical application of Indigenous governance in the Pacific and their perspectives on organised crime and on women in leadership and on institutional approaches to corruption. And reducing corruption through the engagement of ordinary people is what Transparency International New Zealand and the global movement are all about. Ngā mihi to Rochelle Stewart-Allen, who has curated these series of webinars and done all the hard work, and to Zenaida of For Purpose, who is managing our tech. We can also only do these forums with funding. Thank you to Transparency International, with funding provided through Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia. I'm going to hand over to Susana shortly, but just some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube site. Please make sure you mute your microphones until we open it up for discussion. Also, bearing in mind we have variable internet connections. We hope it will hold, but that's just the way of it. We'll deal with it when we get there. And also, this is an information sharing event. We assume a range of understanding of the topic. So if there's anything you don't understand, please ask a question in the chat. Also use the chat to ask questions of our speakers or to make comments. There's no dumb questions. We want to have kōrero that is useful. And we're also happy to field questions after the event. And finally, our values are integrity, courage, transparency, respect, and non-partisanship. And we bring those values to this hui today. We respect different opinions. We can all learn from each other. Now that's enough talk from me. I'm going to hand over to Susana. Susana Lei'autua is a journalist and broadcaster with Radio New Zealand National, where she is a presenter, producer, and newsreader. She is from the Lei'autua and Taupa'u families of Manono in Samoa. Susana is the founder of LAKA in Onehunga, which champions heritage and contemporary art and culture of the Pacific region. Susana was also a Fulbright Senior Scholar at New Zealand University's Asia Pacific American Institute. Talofa lava, Susana, over to you.
Talofa, Julie. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Susana Lei'autua tōku ingoa. Talofa lava, bulavinaka, malo elele, kia orana, hello, good morning. Welcome each and every one of you to our roundtable webinar, Raising the Bar, Civil Society's Expectations for Political Integrity in the Pacific. It's occurred to me to share this chant from my family to anchor in the conversation that we're about to have, because it's one that sits within our region in very, very deep ways for a very long time, and I want to acknowledge that. Oe au e lau tui e, Oi auelo tui e. Le tui a manu o loa ave. Oi auelo tui e. Now, before I introduce our speaker, first let me share with you who our guest speakers are today, because this is a very specific topic and we're very fortunate to have the speakers that we have. And I want to take this moment to welcome Ratu Eroni Ledua Dina, who is joining us from Suva. Our other speakers today, Georgina Warwar from Vanuatu and Elizabeth Kite in Tonga, both of them are having connectivity challenges. So at this point, they are not with us to start, but should they arrive in, of course, we will welcome them. And I want to take this moment to also remind you, because I know you already know this part, but it's important to hear it from me, that we are welcoming your questions, your thoughts, your feedback in our chat throughout this talanoa. And of course, once we've heard from Eroni, you'll understand how interactive today's session is. It's the nature of this roundtable. This is our second session in Transparency International New Zealand's Women and Gender Diverse Roundtable series for 2025. And once we've had this, you'll also know that you can refer to it again on YouTube and, of course, share it with other people who may not have been able to join us today. So very active, very interactive, and, of course, live and in real time. That said, I really want to hand over to Ratu Eroni Ledua Dina, Fijian human rights advocate, community leader, executive director, and one of the two who founded Trans Affirmative Action Guild, championing MVPF FAF rights in communities in Fiji and around the Pacific region, as well as mental health and inclusive leadership across the Pacific. That's a starter and a jumping off point, because no one can really articulate what it is that you do, Eroni, better than you. Bula vinaka.
Bula Susana, and Bula everyone. I can first start by saying a huge binaka to the organizers for always creating platforms and spaces for gender diverse people. One of the many examples of marginalized communities all from all over the Pacific, all over the world, who don't seem to have space provided to them so they could just simply have a voice. So we're a big Vinaka Vakalevu to Susana and the team for the invitation, which I gladly accepted. And Susana was talking about my history. Well, my history with the theme of discussion today would probably start really with my work with mental health and of course suicide and my introduction to something very traumatic. So that was my introduction to political spaces. The ignition of that passion started off when I was in the University of the South Pacific. Fast forward, I got involved in quite a few movements, got the Youth Champs for Mental Health, and then branching off to the Males Empowerment Network, which specialized on specific work around sexual and reproductive health and rights, and moved on there until they had a rebranding where they became a Rainbow Pride Foundation to this day. And I am currently sitting on their board, serving as the human resource lead. So that's the progression of my work with civil society. And I work with the Pacific Sexual and Gender Diversity Network professionally, looking after programs. Now, that was where it opened up doors to engage not only nationally here in Fiji, but more engagement in the Pacific. especially when I was looking after projects around decriminalization, and of course legislative changes that need to happen all over the Pacific in order to decriminalize homosexuality, etc. So I guess that should provide some perspective on my contribution this afternoon. Other than that, in 2022, during the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which was in November, there was a national consultation that happened with trans and gender diverse peoples, non-binary, about the formulation of a movement that was specific to them. The reason why this conversation started was because the anti-trans and anti-drag narrative started encroaching in Pacific waters, coming in via Australia, via the United States. And that was the foundation that started and birthed the establishment of the Trans Affirmative Action Guild, which is an organization I started with Benjamin Patel, and which we have co-founded, and I'm the current executive director for. So it's now going on to 3 years since establishment, and we've been doing a lot of work. Really, most of this work is just about providing rationale and anecdotal evidence, because really data needs to be supported by resourcing. And since we are one of the most under-resourced organizations, because of the kind of community and key populations we look after, we do what we can, most of which is costless. But we continue to do so. We've established really strong relationships with stakeholders within the state, so we can have very crucial conversations. Just last week, we talked about the review. There was a review strategy that happened here in Suva on how data was collected. So we were the lone gender diverse organization in that space to push that the continuous invisibilization of marginalized communities through the lack of disaggregated data is the responsibility of the state, and the state has failed us so many times in ensuring that we remain invisibilized. So yes, that's been the nature of our work from here and there. Most really at the core is, as you probably may be able to determine from the name of the organization, so affirmative action. So really it's providing spaces that affirm the lives of Vakasa, Sion, and trans diverse peoples in Fiji. So Vakasa is the prefix for an Itoke word that was born to describe trans-like, but not necessarily trans-complete, but trans-like characteristics, because Vakasa and Sion, which is from our Ratu heritage, they not necessarily may completely embody the trans identities, but they're much more complex in the fact that they're born out of indigeneity, and they're born out of a whole lot more rather than just transitioning. So this is something we're trying to reaffirm with members of our community, especially in our efforts to socialize information regarding us. Part of the challenge and the pushback really from society has been because of the lack of information and the fact that most of these trans and drag narratives are actually imports that are still very much very alien to Pacific societies, and hence why there's this built-up pushback that sometimes can get volatile and can be harmful to trans and Vakasa and Sion diverse identities here in Fiji. So it's the management of that, and affirming Indigenous identities for us is in part a great part of why it's important for us to inform our society that this is exactly the words that you created for members of our community. This was born out of you. These are words that are used from a space of love, and we would like to reintroduce Bakasa people back into society by using the language that was created for them. So that's part of the affirmation work that we do here as well. And as you may realize, Susana, because we're champions of indigenizing our language, by extension of that, automatically by default, we're also a champion of bodily autonomy and self-determination. This is a large part of why of our work around decolonization, around decolonizing mindsets, around decolonizing behaviors, around decolonizing relationships. These are part of the many things that have changed over a while. A lot of people are always shocked when I let them know that how the Pacific was colonized was by invitation. We weren't colonized by conquest. There was no war to be fought. We invited our colonizers. So the perspective has always been the perception that white people, we glorified them. So they were our saviors. So this made it easy for them to make certain calls and demonize certain aspects of our culture and our practices. Because we invited them onto our shores, our relationship started off that way. So it was whatever the colonizer said was what went. So it was gospel. And funny I say the word gospel because the gospel, religion, was a very effective tool of theirs to convert beliefs and change perspectives, and of course, invisibilize relationships that were old, that were ancient, that had purpose. Bodies that were not meant to be fitting in the binary, bodies that captured the beauty of diversity, the spectrum that came with it. This all disappeared, especially most predominantly in Melanesia. I know that's a colonial term, but just for identity's sake, in Melanesia, it is very, very strong. Why is it strong? Colorism. That's something we also need to talk about. So with decolonization, we must also realize that we glorify the colonizer or we glorify Western ideologies. We seem to lack the interest in critical thinking when it comes to Western ideologies. And with that follows the fact that sometimes we make sacrifices of our very being. The authentic self is sacrificed to incorporate foreign practices and foreign ideologies. This is one of the reasons why there's so many young generations all over the Pacific right now that can barely speak their native tongue. Again, this is in large part of the fact that the native tongue is even not celebrated in the education or the school curriculum. I have always wondered every time I spoke with our own local Ministry of Education as to why is not vernacular a compulsory subject.
I want to jump. Oh, sorry, keep going.
Yeah.
No, keep going. I'll jump in. You finish that thought. My apologies.
Okay. It's interesting that we're not realizing ourselves that we are investing a lot of resources and a lot of energy just to make sure that we have a fragment of what our culture really was, and it's beginning to show. And if there's something that civil society needs to really talk about, it's a solution to a lot of problems, behavioral problems, a lot of state representations, a lot of leadership, even candidacies. If there was support and there was people who were working from a place of authentic preservation and modernization at the same time, it's very, very important that whoever chooses to stand up for us in any election, who chooses to lead us into a better, what a better country would look like, these are really the basic things they need to find balance. The balance being, we need to balance our identity not sacrifice it, and balance it out with modernity. We have every right to determine the fact that we can go on with both. We can't go on with one without the other. We can go on with both. Who said we can't? Yes, thank you, Susana.
No, brilliant. Let's maintain the flow. I wanted to pick up on something, and so you've shared an extraordinary amount in the most succinct of ways. And I wanted to come back to the work that you were referencing last week, because I think there's a level of detail that we would enjoy when you speak about affirmative action, authentic preservation, balanced with modernisation. What are some of those actual practical steps that you could share with us that you've just been participating in as it relates to data collection? Just as examples, so we can start to compare it with what we may or may not be experiencing wherever we happen to be today.
I'm glad you asked, Susana, because the word respect in Pacific culture is so much more deeper in meaning. It comes with deep-rooted ancient beliefs. And one of the reasons why it was a means to function society was because it was over thousands and thousands of years of trial and error. And the fact that respect was what made society sane, why can't we go back to simple best practices? Just because culture is something that's not documented, is something that really isn't tangible. This is something we have to talk about again when it comes to decolonization. How much worth are we placing on ancestral knowledge that's undocumented? Best practices. I've used this a lot in our community work. Part of the success of our work in our community by reintroducing aspects of which is respect. Meaning Viwakani, which is relationships, basically. Strengthening relationships. And there's other things like Navi Mararoi, meaning looking after each other. These were bigger priorities than the optic identifiers that separated us from each other that we should probably zone in on, because now we have a little taste of the unrealistic standards of beauty that Western society has brought on with us. Because back in the day, it wasn't really about that. It was about how we had each other. And here's another a little interesting fact that I like to remind my own people. Exiles were a part of a practice all over the Pacific. People were exiled for certain things that they did. Most of it was either through witchcraft or insubordination. It was always either one of the two. There was never any exile because somebody was gender diverse or a sexual minority. Because these were topics that were taboo to talk about, whether hetero or homo. Nobody indulged in sexual conversations. What happened behind closed doors was nobody's business. What has changed? I think that's what we need to start asking ourselves. What value systems have now determined the change in these teachings and these ancient practices? We need to start bringing back, it's okay to be uniquely you. It's none of our business. It's okay for people to survive and do whatever they can in their spare time because it has nothing to do with the bigger picture. Because we're driven by duty, because we're attached to a tribe, we're attached to a Matangali, as we call that in Fiji. And this determines how we interact with each other. It wasn't about who I was choosing to sleep with at night behind closed doors. It was never about that. So we need to go back, decolonize our perspectives, have much more fluid talanoas, because the beauty about talanoa, as I would remember it, it was outside of position and hierarchy. It was free flow of sharing of information from the most ordinary person right to the most high-ranking individual. And it was all done in the space in front of Kava, etc. And that was the beauty of talanoa. So let's allow more spaces to talanoa with our people. Our people need to start hearing this more. Another thing I've learned in my years of trying to see how we can better our advocacy, how we can better our interventions, especially with state or when it comes to our impending elections. Fiji's elections coming up next year. Part of the analysis has always been about. Oh, sorry.
What have you found in terms of how to better? What have you, in your affirmative action, what are some of the things that you've actually discovered so far?
Yes. So one thing I realized is all people needed was just an opportunity to hear about it, because I then come to realize that indigenous societies, especially in the Pacific, and if you look at the history of Pacific peoples, we are kinesthetic learners. We learn by visual interpretation, we learn by feel and touch, um, and we learn by and through nature. So if we can ensure that our people are seeing much more of this visible in front of them, the practice of respect, the practice of vewekani, the practice of vimargoi, as we would say it here in Fiji, the practice of vibakaturangataki. Now that's the most premier for us in Fiji, the vibakaturangataki. Chiefliness. It wasn't only reserved for chiefs. I come from a chiefly family. That's part of the privilege I've had to always declare, because I use that privilege in my intervention. Now, Vipakaturangaki is something that's done to anyone and everyone, because it is the most respectful thing to do to an elder, a young person. And it's always due to because of some sort of relationship that was formed over the years, or ancient kinships that was formed, etc. So why can't we bring that and then at the same time still find modernities, but interpreted by us? I feel like us in the Pacific, we have been robbed of the opportunity to modernize on our own terms. Sometimes I envision the Pacific as amazing as it is already now. I can just imagine if we were allowed to modernize and find modernity on our own terms without coloniality. Because of all the ancient knowledge we already had, and because of how we functioned so well with societies, small pockets of societies and communities, we functioned so well, and we allowed to evolve. When I say evolve, I also meant, allowed the time to evolve and heal. I feel like we've been rushed to evolution, and we've been hurt on that journey because we weren't allowed time to heal from that rushing. That's part of the disadvantages of this rush that we've had. For example, in Fiji, modernity is not more than 200 years old in terms of education. Look how far we've come as a nation in the Pacific. In 200 years, we've become the hub of the Pacific. And already we're beginning to see moral decay. How is that so? It doesn't make sense. We need to start having much more critical conversations. It all boils down to some aspects of our history that we need to talk about and unpack and start tailoring solutions for problems we refuse to discuss. So yes, really, Susana, that's part of the realization that I've been having. It's been making very interesting conversations in my area of work, especially when they have that questioning look that this conversation is being had with a Vakasa trans person. And I always look at them as like, you need to give us a chance. Some of us are capable of much more deeper thoughts. We're deeper thinkers spiritually by nature. We exist beyond the binary. Give us a chance. We've got huge opportunities to contribute to how the society could become so much better if we would just give it a chance. So yeah, that's what I found out so far, Susana.
Who are the conversations with at the moment, and who do they need to be with?
Sure. So it brings me to that whole feminist concept around patriarchy, power. So these conversations need to be had with people who are in power, the loud, powerful stakeholders, and let's not forget the silent powerful people who actually move the dices along, but are not always the visible ones. You need to find out who they all are. Some interesting activities that I have with my volunteers and of course my dedicated staff is stakeholder mapping. It's a mapping exercise of just figuring out who's holding a stake at every aspect, at every level of this intervention that we're going to be making. And we need to know who they are. We need to know how do we talk to them, what kind of people they are, because it's much more than just tailored texts. Because humanity, the humanity of it all is change really happens when you build relationships with people. Because you can't really technically make people change. They need to be willing to change. So it starts with having the most important conversations. What's the buy-in for them? That's always the interesting thing. What's their takeaway? How much risk is it for them to proudly step up and say, yes, Rhonda, yes, Eroni, I'm going to be your champion. There's risks that come with that. It's also about strategizing what's the timing of those interventions. So these are all the different kind of conversations I've had. I've had them with church leaders. I've had them with people who were ministers, who are currently ministers in Parliament. I wish I've had them with more, but we do have a wonderful ally that's in there that other than that, then it's of course we work through with our partners in the embassies. Sometimes when we can't get across, they do talk to their peers or their colleagues within parliament spaces to try and secure conversations in talanoa time. So that's been the strategy for us. And the great thing that most of this work has been costless, but has been very much labor intensive. There's a lot of physical movement and presence required, and psychologically, I also have to be open to declaring fatigue. I can't afford to be worn out and be attending to these meetings. I have to be present and aware, and just be mindful, not only of myself, but being mindful of the interactions I have with other people, especially with these leaders. That's the only way to get anything done.
I'm just taking a pause there and taking that in, and I also want to acknowledge that one of our participants has shared with us very fortunately, and I want to acknowledge you for this award that you have won, the Franco-German Prize for Human Rights and the Rule of Law that you received last year. Because listening to you, and I will talk for a moment so you can take a breath, it's very clear to me as the person who's here to facilitate this conversation for all of us online that there are so many aspects that you are caring for, that authentic preservation and modernisation is massive, beyond a scale that the words speak to. And of course, we're referring to the English language and using it as a shared space in this talanoa, and only as a shared space, by acknowledging it as a tool, as a point of entry into the things that you're giving us. And that in today's talanoa, I want to acknowledge that you are providing so many jumping off points for anyone on this call or anyone who will come to this webinar at a later date to then pursue either directly with you or with your organisation or with collectively other organisations. There's something that I want to pick up on before we go to our big questions of this webinar. And I want to do it gently, but I think it's really important, and you've touched on it in very elegant ways. How do we, you, us, maintain our well-being? And how do we take steps to address the healing that's required? What have you and your affirmative activists found useful?
Wow, it's a loaded question. I say this because representing this community that is continuously asked, what's our reason to exist? Every day. And knowing that there are so many, and so many who are young, that fight through it in their own special yet powerful way, gives me fuel to continue on in this fight. Because there have been times, even I, as a leader of this movement, of the movement that I started around 3 years ago and have been doing more than 10 years of advocacy work, nearly 20, where I have openly declared I'm tired, because advocacy can get confrontational, in extreme passion. There can be heated moments. There can be a lot of sacrifice on sanity, really, sometimes. Part of the healing, the continuous healing for us, is something that is in our strategic plan, which is part of our aspirational work, is we found power in community. And one of the reasons, well, one of the outcomes of that find is to establish a community center. We've always found that we're safest amongst each other. Resilience is undoubtedly always amongst each other, because we are the perfect embodiment of a community that understands exactly what you go through. So it's important, whether we're trans, whether we're Vakasa, or you're straight, or you identify a certain way, whatever that may be, it's important that you find your safe spaces and systems of support. It's important to not be alone when you find yourself in this darkness. So really, the Trans Affirmative Action Guild was born out of building community. I know this is a word that we use a lot when we establish civil society organizations, movement building. But for us, it's about building community, having that space to find each other, and knowing that whatever state I'm in, I am amongst people who know exactly what I'm going through, or who will do their best to try and lighten that load for me. So building communities is very important. The safe space that we have is virtually. We have more than 300 members from all across the country now since our establishment, which is tribute to the success of our support systems. So I think that it all boils down to that fact. It's important to have a strong support system. Find your people. It's important. Find your people. When you find them, keep them close. And when they're close, always have them close by when you get into trouble, because those are the ones that will be able to lift you out of any situations. And if they can't, at least you have another mind and another pair of eyes, another pair of ears, who will be able to refer to you to much more safer persons, maybe officers, nurses, professionals, who could do so much better. So it's better to be with people, support systems. Thank you, Susana.
This sounds like an obvious question, but I want to ask it. How do you make that step to find somebody if you feel that you are very much alone? What are some of the ways that you respond to that?
That's why it's important for those of us who are A-OK and who are needing to have these important conversations about the realities that exist all around us, that there are people questioning why they exist, because this world is so cruel. For those of us who are realizing and who are way more better in a better situation than they are, this is where we act, where we start acting, where we start reminding people who are around us, whether they be people of power or whether they be the most ordinary person. Notice red flags, sinking flags. Realize that body language can tell a lot. So it's those really the responsibility is on those of us who are here and acting and telling them that we could be that support system, or let them know that, you know what, it's time to think about support systems, or we can start calling who their close people are, even though they don't seem to be close at that moment. That's where our responsibility comes in. Or before that person finds that dark place, let's start having a conversation with them right now while they can still see light. It's good to be with people. It's scary for a person who's had suicidal ideations. It's hard to think about any positivity when you're in that dark place. I was lucky because I had thought about the support system before I reached that dark place. I had somebody who saw the flags, the red flags, who saw the warnings, and became that intercessor. So we need to be those people. We need to know that these things happen, and we need to start making interventions before somebody finds themselves in a dark place.
This is a perfect moment for us to now introduce. Oh, actually, I'm going to share this question. Actually, for Gwyndian, who's just shared this question, would you be able to bring it into this next stage where we're up to? Eroni, thank you. And acknowledging our two guest speakers who aren't with us for connectivity challenges. We're going to keep going with the format, and fingers crossed they arrive on this call, but also acknowledging it allows us to gather again and to keep going with this wider talanoa. Our question now, and we're going to go into breakout groups, which I always find is incredibly magical in this virtual reality that we're in. The question is, and it's a question for leaders, including parliamentarians, but for all leaders, what are the top expectations civil society, particularly gender diverse voices, women included, have of our leaders regarding integrity, transparency, and accountability? So we're going to take this moment. Eroni, thank you for being in one of the groups. I'll be in another one of the groups, and I believe that Julie will be in our third group. We will then all come back to share, but this is an opportunity for us all to get together. If you've placed questions into the chat, please share them in these breakout groups. Each of our groups will identify 3 to 5 clear priorities. These priorities can be demands to shape a collective advocacy agenda. So we'll come back and each of our groups will share those 3 to 5. And now let's head to those breakout groups, and we'll circle back when it's time.
Okay, awesome.
I'm just waiting for the thumbs up that everyone is back in the mix. We've just all been, if you're coming back in, yes, we have all been in 3 breakout rooms discussing the same question, which I'll just repeat, which is, what are the top expectations civil society, particularly women and gender diverse voices, have of their leaders regarding integrity, transparency, and accountability? Just to recap, we've been in 3 breakout rooms discussing this. Before we share our 3 to 5 demands, requests, expectations, I'd like to welcome our second guest speaker, Georgila Warawara from Vanuatu, into the mix. We know that there's been connectivity challenges This is part of the extraordinary part of the world that we are all in. So without further delay, Georgila, welcome, welcome, welcome. Please share with us about your leadership path and your position, your expectations, whatever it is that you would like to give us today as it relates to civil society and its best possible practice.
Thank you so much, Susana, and thank you everybody for your patience while I find my way into this webinar today, but I'm so happy to be here. And I'd like to first begin my conversation by making a statement. Personally, my expectations of political leadership in our region are very high. Not because I expect perfectionism, but because I believe leadership is a sacred trust. It carries the hopes of communities who wake up every day facing the realities of climate change, inequality, and limited opportunity, yet who continue to believe that good governance can make a difference. And every once in a while, these same people carry that hope on a walking stick past that bush-checkered road to the polling station, with the quiet but powerful belief that their vote will open doors to better lives, that they will see access to essential services, that their children will one day have proper health care, that they will live free from harm, fear, and discrimination under law. That small act, walking to vote, is not just them participating. It's faith. Faith that leadership will honor its promise. My name is Georgila Waror, and I work at the intersection of youth, governance, and community development, connecting young people, area councils, and local governments to the policy processes that shape their lives. Through my work across Vanuatu and the Pacific, I have seen strength of our people, the resilience, the creativity, and the courage to demand better. And I've also seen how quickly hope fades when citizens feel shut down, when information is hidden, when voices go unheard, and when accountability seems optional. That's why I often say to young people that I've had the privilege to mentor that citizenship is not a spectator sport. Get in it, be involved. We cannot afford to be silent when decisions affect our future, and that future is ours as young people of the Pacific region. I want every young person, every woman in every rural community, every person who's ever felt left out to know that their voice is their power. Civic action is not only a right, it is a responsibility. When citizens speak, citizens like us, young women, young girls, especially marginalized youth, when we speak, democracy breathes. When we stay silent, democracy withers. So I'm so happy to be part of this conversation and to shape bigger policy, bigger advocacy campaigns that will affect our Pacific region, our Pacifica. As civil society, as a Indigenous woman in civil society here in Vanuatu, my expectation is very clear and uncompromising. I expect leaders to lead with integrity, who don't use their office space for personal gain, but serve with humility and accountability. I expect transparency, not as a slogan, but as a daily practice. Access to information is not a privilege. It's a pillar of democracy and is what is expected. And in my role as Secretary of the Vanuatu Media Association, I must stress the importance of journalism and media as a backbone pillar of democracy and of freedom of speech. And I expect accountability, not after something goes wrong, but every day, in every decisions, in every systems that work in our countries, laws that are enforced, and institutions that are strong enough to hold even the most powerful to account. And I know we've been having conversations earlier this morning on integrity and accountability in practice, but I'd like to just share my point of view on what integrity to me means. And that it's not an abstract concept, it's visible. It's actually something that we can see in the everyday choices that leaders make, in how conflicts and interests are desired, declared, and managed. It's in whether citizens are consulted meaningfully, not as just box ticking exercise, but with genuine openness to their input. It's in whether parliamentarians use their positions to bridge communities and government or to build walls between them. When leaders model integrity, they create a culture where accountability becomes natural, not confrontational. And as members of civil society, we would like our leaders to know that civil society is not the opposition. We're not here to attack. We are here to strengthen. We are partners in nation building, working to bridge the gap between the government and the people. And our role is to raise the mirror to help leaders see what citizens see. In this sense, expectations from civil society are not demands, they are the commitments to our shared values. We want parliamentarians and we want parliaments to become open and accessible to the common citizen. Budgets that are transparent and consultations that are real, and representation that truly reflects the diversity of our people, women, youth, people with disabilities, SOGI, gender diverse communities, rural voices. When these voices are at the table, policies are stronger and governance becomes more human, more grounded, and more just. That is why I value this Raising the Bar series so much, and I'm so happy to finally to be part of this wonderful talanoa. They're not just discussions, they're also part of a broader Pacific-wide movement to document our expectations, to map where integrity systems work, and to inform future advocacy and research, led by Transparency International New Zealand. My message, I'm talking so much, but my message right now to our leaders is integrity is not something to aspire to do. It is the baseline of leadership. The people you serve expect openness, honesty, and humility. And really, I'd like to see leaders that are more accessible to citizens, to ordinary citizens like myself, to marginalized groups. And we are not your critics. We are and can be your compass. To our citizens and our people of the Blue Pacific, use your voice, hold your leaders to account, ask questions, show up to consultations, read the budgets, demand the transparency respectfully, but relentlessly. And to our young people, the future of this region is ours. Don't wait to be invited. Walk in. Your generation is not the problem. You are the promise and the potential solution. Use your voice, your art, your activism, and your technology to push for integrity and fairness. This region needs your courage more than ever. Thank you, Tomas. Over to you, Susana.
Georgina, you arrived right on time. Thank you very, very much. I will, because I'm just looking at the clock, acknowledge everything that you have shared and the timing of it, as I have the challenging but delightful task of providing a brief summary. I want to thank everybody who participated in the 3 breakout groups. Georgila, for you coming in after our sharing, the timing has been so precise. We couldn't have orchestrated that if we tried. So here is a brief summary, and just to acknowledge everyone who has participated. In the breakout group that I facilitated, a couple of things. We need to listen to the voices of the community. Policy always must go back to consultation. We need to see clearly how decisions are made, and leaders need to report back after evaluations as a way to hold leaders to account. In the breakout room with Eroni and Rochelle, some examples, the state needs to better collaborate and share funding with civil society, much more visibility and active involvement of officials with civil society, better understanding of being accountable to civil society, better support for the state of civil society, open door policies, better collaboration, connection, and trust between state and civil society, partnerships and connection between leaders and the community on the ground. Find culturally appropriate ways to connect. Civil society often have the solutions, but require support to enable them. And then from group 3 that Julie Hagi facilitated, gender diversity has been colonised, not genuine inclusion at the decision maker level, rather kept on the outside. The importance of mental health support networks should be encouraged by leaders to avoid isolation of individuals. With community comes responsibility, need to offer safe conversations. How do we change from activities that promote violence, drinking, and more lately large amounts of drugs for men, sport images, towards more discussion about what makes a man and more understanding of concepts like teina tuakana? I'm not sure the reference in terms of location, but I think in order to honour that sharing from that group, to share that as precisely as I could from the notes. Another reference from group 3, our leaders need to be encouraging when diverse people of any kind speak up. People should not have to trade integrity and transparency in order to fit in. It's quite incredible, isn't it? It's not about requiring a lot of time. This is really a demonstration as the facilitator of this webinar of what happens when we're all given the opportunity to come together and hear each other and realise that we are actually also being heard. And so I want to end my part of today's webinar by acknowledging our speakers, Ratu Eroni Ledua Dina and Suva, Georgila Warwar Vanuatu, thank you so much. Elizabeth Kite, we will have the opportunity to hear from at another time. And I'd now also like to thank Rochelle Stewart-Allen for her curatorial expertise, and Zenaida Beatson for holding everything together technically as we navigate the extraordinary technology that we have that allows us to come together. Julie Hagi, CE, the leader of Transparency International New Zealand, back to you. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora, kia ora. I'm so ngā mihi. I'm so grateful to have sat in this space and to hear very very clear, very analytical, and very purposeful statements by the speakers, and a great facilitation. Thank you, Susana, as well. It's just the hearing of the experiences moving into leadership roles, and then about our being. It takes courage to lead, I think, and their talk and their stories reflect this. So thank you, Eroni, thank you, Georgila, and thank you, Susana. And thanks to all of those who've spread the word about our whole webinar series. Thanks to all of those who asked questions and made comments today and at other occasions. Mihi mia koutou, kia koutou. And thanks for attending. And now, kua hua te marama. This is a full circle. Now we've reached the end of our series, but only this. There will be more because there's both hunger and energy. So I'm going to finish with this whakatauki from Rangawhenua of Tainui. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, kia tere te karohirohi, I mua e tau huarahi. May the calm be widespread, may the surface of the ocean glisten like greenstone, and may the shimmer of summer dance across your path. Ngā mihi nui, haere rā, mā te wā.